Good day and welcome back to Scriptures Unlocked. Today, I'll be continuing our series on marriage, divorce, and remarriage. In the first part, we looked at the biblical view of marriage. The second part of this series, we looked at the law governing divorce and remarriage according to Deuteronomy chapter 24, verses 1 to 4. And this presentation will be looking at divorce and putting away the difference between those two words or those two phrases as we continue in this our series on marriage, divorce, and remarriage. So ladies and gentlemen, much of the confusion around the issue of divorce and remarriage can be laid squarely at the feet of poor biblical hermeneutics, which is really the methodology used to interpret the Bible, as well as poor translation and the misunderstanding of two Hebrew words. There is a clear distinction that needs to be drawn between the scriptures and the Bible. The scriptures are the actual words that are inspired and penned in the original Hebrew and Greek languages, while the Bible as we know it is the modern translation and transliteration of those original Hebrew and Greek texts. Friends, it is almost unavoidable that something will be lost in the meaning as translation is done from one language to another. Therefore, it is always prudent and important to go back to the original languages if they are available to get clarity on a particular matter. This presentation is going to be a very comprehensive study by looking at the original Hebrew word for divorce and the original Hebrew word for putting away, because proper biblical hermeneutics demands that verses and passages must be interpreted correctly. See, friends, exegesis is a Greek word which literally means to lead out and is the process of arriving at conclusion by what the text says. It is extracting from the text what is stated instead of reading into the text our own preconceived ideas, suppositions, and biases, or what we think the text means. That, my friends, is called eisegesis. There are many modern translations and versions of the Bible that does just that, because they are influenced by the preconceived doctrinal position of the translators or a particular church. It must also be clearly noted, again, that proper biblical hermeneutics dictates that verses must be interpreted in the immediate context of the passage, chapter, book, and covenant or testament in which they were originally written. Friends, what was applicable under the Old Covenant, for instance, may not necessarily be applicable in the New Testament. You see, as Bible students, we generally tend to try and make application of things that were only specific to a particular era to Christians in the 21st century, while at the same time negating what the specific issue that was being dealt with meant to the original audience. Context is important. So verses must always be interpreted taking into account the culture, historical setting, and situation. So in order to unlock the true meaning of the scriptures, we must endeavor at all times to try and understand the original meaning of the passage and how the persons being spoken to understood what was being said. Therefore, it becomes necessary to consult the original language when there is a seeming or apparent contradiction of God's inspired words and our interpretation. Our default position as Bible students should always be, let God be true and every man a liar, according to Romans 3, verse 4. You see, friends, the Bible is an historical book that was written at a specific time, in a particular culture, to a specific group of people, and for a particular purpose with a view to highlight and solve specific problems. Therefore, it must be understood and interpreted within that particular context first, before trying to apply it to persons living in the 21st century. As is my style, I'll be sharing my study notes, and as I promised, and I can guarantee you that this will be a very exhaustive and comprehensive study on the two Hebrew words translated as divorce and putting away in our modern Bibles. So at this time, I'll be sharing my study notes with you so that you can follow along as we unlock the scriptures together. To fully understand and clear up any misconceptions about divorce and remarriage, a proper distinction must be made between divorce and sender out, according to Deuteronomy chapter 24, verse 1. The phrase sender out can also be translated as put away, and it is the Strong's number H7971. I will now proceed to demonstrate and differentiate between divorce and putting away by looking at the original Hebrew. Friends, the Hebrew word translated as divorce in Deuteronomy chapter 24 and verse 1 is Kerithus, and it is the Strong's number H3748. And it occurs only 4 times in 4 verses of the Hebrew scriptures. So the word translated as divorce in our modern Bibles is the Hebrew word Kerithus, and it can only be found in 4 verses in the Hebrew concordance of the King James Version. And at this time, I'm going to look at that particular Hebrew word in the Blue Letter Bible, so you can have an appreciation for that particular word and what it means. So let us go to the Blue Letter Bible and look at the particular word that is translated as divorce. So let's go to the Blue Letter Bible, and we're going to go to Deuteronomy chapter 24, and we're going to look at that particular Hebrew word that is translated as divorce. So this is the law of divorce. And let's just recap the law. Deuteronomy chapter 24, verse 1. When a man had taken a wife and married her, and it come to pass that she find no favor in his eyes, because he had found some uncleanness in her, then let him write her a bill of divorcement and give it in her hand and send her out of his house. Verse 2 says, and when she is departed out of his house, she may go and be another man's wife. So that, plain and simple, friends, is the law governing divorce that was given by God, and that was addressed in the previous video. So let's now look at the word translated as divorce. It is the Strong's number H3748, and this is what the Hebrew word is. It is Kerithus, and this is the pronunciation.
Strong's H3748. Kerithus. Kerithus.
Kerithus.
Second entry. Kerithus. Kerithus.
Okay, so that's the pronunciation. And notice King James translation count. It appears 4 times in the King James Version. And it is translated as divorcement 3 times and divorce 1 time. It means outline of biblical usage. This is how it is used. It means divorce, dismissal, divorcement. So that is how that particular word is used. This is the Strong's definition. Kerithus means a cutting of the matrimonial bond. That is divorce or divorcement. And let me just go down further, because we'll be addressing all of these verses in this particular presentation. So it says Strong's number H, and the H here stands for Hebrew. Strong's number H3748 matches the Hebrew Kerithus, which occurs 4 times in 4 verses in the Hebrew concordance of the King James Version. So Kerithus appears 4 times. It appears once in Deuteronomy chapter 24, verse 1, once in Deuteronomy 24, verse 3, where the law was restated. A 3rd time it appears in Isaiah 50, verse 1. Here it is, divorcement. And finally, it appears in Jeremiah chapter 3, verse 8 as divorce. So the Hebrew word Kerithus appears only 4 times in the Hebrew scriptures. So only 4 times. It is easily to identify the correct meaning of this particular word, because it only appears 4 times in the entire Hebrew scriptures. So let's go back to the before we go to the study notes, I'll also look at the other Hebrew word that we need to make a difference between Kerithus, and which is translated as divorce, and put away, which is the Hebrew word shalah. So let's look at the Hebrew word shalah, or sender out. And this is the Hebrew word. It says, and sender out of his house. Sender is the Strong's number H7971. I'm going to click on this so you can see the meaning of this particular word. So this is it. It's shalah. This is a sheen. This is the Hebrew letter sheen, which gives the SH sound. This is the lamed, which is our equivalent letter L. And this is the het. So let's listen to the pronunciation of this particular Hebrew word.
Strong's H 7971. Shalach. Shalach.
Shalah. And notice how many times it appears. So shalah appears 847 times in the Hebrew scriptures. Well, it is translated as 847 times. And it means to send 566 times, go 73 times, send forth or put forth 54 times, sender away or send away 48 times, send out 12 times, put away 7 times. It is also translated as cast out 7 times. So the outline of biblical usage: to send away, let go, stretch forth, or stretch out. To send, to stretch out, extend, direct. To send away, to let loose. To be sent, to send off or away or out or forth, dismiss, give over, cast out. I'm giving you all the definitions because I believe in probity. To let go, set free. To shoot forth, as in branches. To let down, to shoot. To be sent off, to be put away, be divorced, be impelled, to send. So this is the meaning of the word shalah. This is the common usage for the word shalah. And that is the word that is used most often to identify when somebody is being sent away or sent out. So let's go back to our study notes. Our study notes as we continue. So the only other verses that Kerithus can be found in our Deuteronomy 24 verse 3, Isaiah 50 verse 1, Jeremiah 3 verse 8. And we looked at those verses when we looked at Kerithus. It is translated, Kerithus, that is translated as divorcement 3 times and divorce 1 time. Kerithus is a very specific word that is always translated as divorcement or divorce. And I showed it to you earlier. In the 4 verses that it appears, it is always accompanied by the term bill, which is the Strong's number H5612. The term bill of divorcement in Hebrew is sefer Kerithus, and it is a legal document or the certificate of divorce that must be written by the husband and given to the wife. I'm going to go back to the Blue Letter Bible to look at this particular word, sefer. So let's go back to the Blue Letter Bible to look at the Hebrew for this particular word. So let's go to the law, Deuteronomy 24 verse 1. It says, the husband was to write her a bill of divorcement. So we looked at divorcement, which is Kerithus. Now we're going to look at the word bill and identify what the meaning of this word is. So it is H5612. So H5612 is sefer. This is the pronunciation.
Strong's H 5612. Sefer. Sefer.
Sefer. And it appears 184 times in the Hebrew scriptures. And it can mean a book. It appears as a book 138 times, a letter 29 times, evidence 8 times, bill 4 times, learning 2 times, register 1 time, scroll 1 time. The outline of biblical usage. It is a book. This is how other meanings. Missive, document, writing, book. Missive, it could be a letter of instruction, a written order, commission, request, written decree. B, legal document, certificate of divorce, deed of purchase, indictment, sign. It can be a book, a scroll, book of prophecies, genealogical register, law book, book of poems. It means book in general. But when it is associated with divorcement, it's called a bill of divorcement, and that is a certificate of divorce or a written decree. So let's go back to the study notes as we continue on this very important topic. So a bill of divorcement was mandated by God to be given to the wife as evidence that she is lawfully divorced. So Kerithus, or divorce, is simply the severing of the matrimonial bond between husband and wife that brings the marriage to an end. This, friends, is precisely what a divorce is supposed to do. However, the Hebrew word used for send her out in Deuteronomy chapter 24, verse 1 is shalah, which is the Strong's number H7971, and we looked at that earlier. It occurs 847 times in 790 verses in the Hebrew concordance of the King James Version. Shalah is also translated as put away and is a general term used to mean send, go, send forth, put forth, and send away. At this stage, it is prudent to remind you, the viewers, that God had proposed and married the children of Israel at Sinai. Exodus 19 records the following details, reading from verse 3. And Moses went up unto God, and Jehovah called unto him out of the mountain, saying, Thus shalt thou say to the house of Jacob, and tell the children of Israel. So the house of Jacob is the same as the children of Israel, because Jacob, his name was changed to Israel, and his descendants were known as the children of Israel. Verse 4 says, Ye have seen what I did unto the Egyptians, and this is God speaking, and how I bear you on eagle's wings and brought you unto myself. Now therefore, if ye will obey my voice indeed, and keep my covenant, then ye shall be a peculiar treasure unto me above all people, for all the earth is mine. And ye shall be unto me a kingdom of priests and an holy nation. These are the words which thou shalt speak unto the children of Israel. So that was God's proposal to them. The people accepted God's proposal because Exodus 19 verse 8 tells us that all the people answered together and said, all that Jehovah had spoken, we will do. When persons are getting married, a man and a woman, when they are taking their vows, the man would say, I do, in response to the vow, and the woman would say, I do, in response to the vow. But in this case, because God was speaking to the nation as a collective, they said that all that Jehovah had spoken, we will do, or we do. Friends, the wedding took place 3 days later at the base of Mount Sinai, and nuptials were exchanged. God outlined his 10 commandments in Exodus 20, verses 1 to 17, along with the relevant laws, statutes, and judgments. And the people once again agreed to be faithful to the vows they took. Notice these words in Exodus 24, reading from verse 3. And Moses came and told the people all the words of Jehovah and all the judgments, and all the people answered with one voice and said, all the words which Jehovah had said will we do. There's the we do. The persons took their vows to God and they said, we do. The marriage covenant, my friends, was written in a book and ratified in blood when Moses sprinkled the people. The scripture records the following in verse 7. And he took the book of the covenant and read in the audience of the people. And they said, all that Jehovah had said will we do. There it is again, and be obedient. And Moses took the blood and sprinkled it on the people and said, behold, the covenant Behold the blood of the covenant, which Jehovah hath made with you concerning all these words. So the covenant was ratified in blood. Friends, I have referenced this to make the point and prove that God was Israel's husband and they were his wife. Isaiah 54 and verse 5 tells us this concerning Israel. Thy maker is thine husband. Jehovah of hosts is his name, and thy Redeemer, the Holy One of Israel. The God of the whole earth shall he be called. You see, friends, God redeemed Israel from the land of Egypt and out of the house of bondage and established them as a nation by giving them the land of Canaan as an inheritance. The weeping prophet wrote in Jeremiah 31, verse 31, and this is what he said. And this is God speaking through his prophet Jeremiah. Behold, the days come, saith Jehovah, that I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah, not according to the covenant that I made with their fathers in the day that I took them by the hand to bring them out of the land of Egypt, which was a reference to what we read in Exodus chapter 19, when God made that covenant with them, which my covenant they break, although I was an husband unto them, saith Jehovah. So there it is, God is saying here that I was an husband unto the children of Israel. The scriptures document that throughout Israel's history, my friends, as God's chosen people, they committed spiritual adultery against him on a number of occasions and broke the very covenant that they made with him. The golden calf episode in Exodus chapter 32 is one such instance, and this happened just 40 days after God spoke the 10 commandments to them. So 40 days after agreeing to be God's wife and to be obedient to his covenant, they broke the marriage vows 40 days later when they made and worshipped a golden calf. Let's now examine both Isaiah 50 verse 1 and Jeremiah 3 so that we can get a better understanding of the difference between the Hebrew words translated as divorce and putting away. In Isaiah 50 verse 1, God issued a challenge to Judah to prove or produce any evidence that he had given her a bill of divorcement and put her away. God had been a faithful husband to them, and according to his own law in Deuteronomy 24 verse 1, husbands were allowed to put away their wives if they no longer found favor in their eyes by giving them a bill of divorcement. However, Judah could not say, I repeat, Judah could not say that God had issued them such a document. I want to notice the rhetorical question that God asked Judah, with the implied answer being that there is none. This is what God said in Isaiah 50 verse 1. And I want to notice that it is going to use the same, it is going to use two Hebrew words. One is translated as divorcement, which is Kerithus, and the other is translated as put away, which is shalah. And that is the correct meaning of these two Hebrew words. Isaiah 50 verse 1 states, thus saith Jehovah, where is the bill of your mother's divorcement, whom I have put away? That was the question. It was a rhetorical question. God was asking them, where is the bill of your mother's divorcement, whom I have put away? Or, which of my creditors is it to whom I have sold you? These are both rhetorical questions. The answer being, there was no bill of divorcement. I did not put you away. Behold, for your iniquities have ye sold yourselves. So they were the ones who sold themselves. And for your transgressions is your mother put away. This verse, friends, is crucial in understanding the difference between divorce and put away, because it highlights the importance of the bill of divorcement. Isaiah 50 verse 1 teaches us that until there is an actual bill of divorcement, there is still hope for forgiveness and reconciliation. I need to repeat this. Isaiah 50 verse 1 is teaching us that until there is an actual bill of divorcement, there is still hope for forgiveness and reconciliation. It also demonstrates that put away does not mean divorce. but is only a separation. This needs repeating as well. Put away does not mean divorce, but is only a separation. The phrase put away is actually the final step in the divorce process and can be used to represent divorce only if it was done according to the stipulation laid down in Deuteronomy chapter 24, verse 1 to 4. So the word or phrase put away is actually the final step in the divorce process, because the man was supposed to write his wife a bill of divorcement, give it in her hand, and then send her away or put her away out of his house. So once she has the bill of divorcement in her hand, the final act is to put her away or send her out of his house. Friends, women were often put away without being given a bill of divorcement, and that was wrong and a clear violation of the law found in Deuteronomy 24, 1 to 4. However, a woman cannot or should not be given a bill of divorcement without being put away. Judah was only separated from God, and it was as a result of their own doing. The Jews could not say that God had severed his relationship with the house of Judah by giving them a bill of divorcement. Hence the rhetorical question in Isaiah 50, verse 1. The challenge was for them to produce the evidence, because the bill of divorcement was the evidence that a woman was legally divorced from her husband. The challenge from God was for them to produce the evidence if they could, because a bill of divorcement was given into the hand of her that was divorced, according to Deuteronomy chapter 24, verse 1 and 3. God was not only a husband to them, but also a father. And fathers could sell their children as slaves to their creditors in repayment of debt that they could not pay. And you can see Exodus 21, verse 7 for this, and Nehemiah 5, verse 5. And I'm going to go there just to make the point. Nehemiah 5, verse 5. So let's look at this. Nehemiah 5, verse 5. So let's look at this particular verse. Nehemiah 5 and verse 5. So if you read the context, let's read the context, a few verses to get the context. This is talking about a famine that was taking place. For there were that said, we, our sons and our daughters are many. Therefore we take up corn for them, that we may eat and live. Some also there were that said, we have mortgaged our lands, vineyards, and houses, that we might buy corn because of the dearth. And a dearth is simply a famine. There were also that said, we have borrowed money for the king's tribute, and that upon our lands and vineyards. Verse 5, which is the key verse. Yet our flesh is as the flesh of our brethren, our children as their children. And lo, we bring into bondage our sons and our daughters to be servants. And some of our daughters are brought into bondage already. Neither is it in our power to redeem them, for other men have our lands and vineyards. So they sold their lands, they mortgaged their lands, and they still could not repay or still could not find anything to eat. And as a result, they sold their children, their sons and their daughters into bondage as a result, so that they could live. So what God was saying to the children of Israel and the children of Judah is that I did not sell you to any of my creditors to repay any debt. So they could not say that God had given them a bill of divorcement. They could not provide that evidence. Neither could they say that God had sold them to any of his creditors as a repayment of a debt. So they could not say that God had sold them to any creditors either. In fact, God declared to Judah that for your iniquities have ye sold yourselves, and for your transgressions is your mother put away. In other words, the tribe of Judah was the author of their own demise. And this can be clearly seen in 2 Chronicles chapter 36. Notice this. Zedekiah, the last king of Judah, was 120 years old when he began to reign. and reigned 11 years in Jerusalem. And he did that which was evil in the sight of Jehovah his God, and humbled not himself before Jeremiah the prophet, speaking from the mouth of the Lord, or the mouth of Jehovah. And notice, I made mention to this in the last video, the previous video, that prophets speak the word of God. And notice that God sent Jeremiah to Zedekiah the king, and he did not humble himself before Jeremiah the prophet, speaking from the mouth of Jehovah. And he also rebelled against King Nebuchadnezzar, who had made him swear by God, but he stiffened his neck and hardened his heart from turning unto Jehovah, God of Israel. Moreover, all the chief of the priests, notice these people who committed transgression, all the chief of the priests and the people transgressed very much after all the abominations of the heathen, and polluted the house of Jehovah, which he had hallowed in Jerusalem. And Jehovah, God of their fathers, sent to them by his messengers, or his prophets, rising up betimes, that is early, and sending, because he had compassion on his people and on his dwelling place. But they, notice what they did, but they mocked the messengers of God and despised his words and misused his prophets, until the wrath of Jehovah arose against his people, till there was no remedy. Therefore he brought upon them the king of the Chaldees, who slew their young men with the sword in the house of their sanctuary, and had no compassion upon young man or maiden, old man, or him that stooped for age. He gave them all into his hand. And all the vessels of the house of God, great and small, and the treasures of the house of Jehovah, and the treasures of the king and of his princes, all these he brought to Babylon. And they burnt the house of God, and brake down the wall of Jerusalem, and burnt all the palaces thereof with fire, and destroyed all the goodly vessels thereof. And them that had escaped from the sword carried he away to Babylon, where they were servants to him and his sons until the reign of the kingdom of Persia, to fulfill the word of Jehovah by the mouth of Jeremiah, until the land had enjoyed her Sabbaths. For as long as she lay desolate, she kept Sabbath, to fulfill 70 years. So Israel, by their own doing, were taken into captivity for 70 years. Israel's sin were many, but they were condemned for mainly two: idolatry and the breaking of the Sabbath. Notice also Jeremiah 35 and the words that God spoke through his prophets, through his prophet. Reading from verse 12. Then came the word of Jehovah unto Jeremiah, saying, Thus saith Jehovah of hosts, the God of Israel, go and tell the men of Judah and the inhabitants of Jerusalem, will ye not receive instruction to hearken to my words, saith Jehovah? The words of Jonadab, the son of Rechab, that he commanded his sons not to drink wine, are performed. But unto this day they drink none, but obey their father's commandment. Notwithstanding, I have spoken unto you, rising early and speaking, but ye hearken not unto me. I have sent also unto you all my servants, the prophets, rising up early and sending them, saying, Return ye now every man from his evil way, and amend your doings, and go not after other gods, there's idolatry, to serve them, and ye shall dwell in the land which I have given you and to your fathers. But ye have not inclined your ear, nor hearkened unto me. So God was pleading with his people. Because the sons of Jonadab, the son of Rechab, have performed the commandment of their father, which he commanded them, but this people hath not hearkened unto me. Therefore, thus saith Jehovah, God of hosts, the God of Israel, Behold, I will bring upon Judah and upon all the inhabitants of Jerusalem all the evil that I have pronounced against them, because I have spoken unto them, but they have not heard, and I have called unto them, but they have not answered. And the result of God doing this was what we read in 2 Chronicles chapter 36, when Nebuchadnezzar came and killed a lot of the Jews, burned the palaces, burned the temple in Jerusalem, and carried away the people into captivity. The Jews were sent into Babylon for a period of 70 years, mainly for idolatry, which is spiritual adultery, a sin which broke the marriage covenant because they worshipped other gods. And the first commandment says that thou shalt have no other gods before me. and the iniquity for which they sold themselves and were put away out of the land. And you can read Jeremiah chapter 25, verse 1 to 11, and Jeremiah chapter 29, verse 4 to 14 for further details. God and Judah, his wife, were estranged or separated for a period of 70 years, but there was no divorce. So being put away, whether it is by your own doing or the husband putting away his wife, was not the same thing as being divorced. To be divorced, there must be a written bill of divorcement. Finally, the final place where the Hebrew word Kerithus is found is in Jeremiah chapter 3, verse 8, which gives a description of God's divorce of the house of Israel. Yes, God is a divorcee. This is very important. The final place where the Hebrew word Kerithus is found is in Jeremiah chapter 3, verse 8. And it gives a description of God's divorce of the house of Israel. Prior to the divorce, God pleaded with Israel and bore with her long. And after all that she had done before the divorce, he was still willing to take her back. Notice these verses in Jeremiah chapter 2, reading from verse 1 onwards. Moreover, the word of Jehovah came to me saying, so this is God sending his prophet Jeremiah to go and plead with his wayward wife, Israel. Go and cry in the ears of Jerusalem, saying, thus saith Jehovah, I remember thee, the kindness of thy youth, the love of thine espousals, when thou wentest after me in the wilderness, in a land that was not sown. So here God was remembering the good old days when the love was new between him and Israel. Verse 3 says, Israel was holiness unto Jehovah, and the first fruits of his increase. All that devour him shall offend. Evil shall come upon them, saith Jehovah. So God was protecting Israel because she was his wife, and a man is supposed to protect his wife. Verse 4 says, hear ye the word of Jehovah, O house of Jacob, and all the families of the house of Israel. Thus saith Jehovah, what iniquity have your fathers found in me, that they are gone far from me, and have walked after vanity, and are become vain? Verse 7 says, and I brought you into a plentiful country, to eat the fruit thereof and the goodness thereof. But when ye entered, ye defiled my land, and made mine heritage an abomination. The priest said not, where is Jehovah? So notice the people or the group of persons who were committing sins against Jehovah. The priest said, where is Jehovah? And they that handle the law knew me not. The pastors also transgressed against me, and the prophets prophesied by Baal, and walked after things that do not profit. Verse 9 says, wherefore I will plead with you. So God was pleading with them. I will plead with you, saith Jehovah, and with your children's children will I plead. So God was making a desperate plea for his wayward wife to come back to him, to come back to the covenant that she had made with him at Sinai. Verse 13 says, for my people have committed two evils. They have forsaken me, the fountain of living waters, and hewed them out cisterns, broken cisterns that can hold no water. For of old time I have broken thy yoke, and burst thy bands. And thou saidst, I will not transgress, when upon every high hill and under every green tree thou wanderest, playing the harlot. So this is what they were doing to God. They were worshiping other gods and playing the harlot. Verse 21 says, yet I had planted thee a noble vine, holy a right seed. How then art thou turned into this degenerate plant of a strange vine unto me? Verse 32 says, can a maid forget her ornaments, or a bride her attire? So she was God's bride. Notice what God goes on to say, yet my people have forgotten me days without number. God continued to plead with his wayward wife in Jeremiah 3. And let's read from verse 1. They, speaking about the people of Judah, say, if a man put away his wife, and she go from him, and become another man's, shall he return unto her again? And that was from, according to the law in Deuteronomy chapter 24. In particular, verse 4. Shall not that land be greatly polluted? but thou hast played the harlot with many lovers. There it is. Yet return again to me, saith Jehovah. So God was addressing the people of Judah, who he asked the very question in Isaiah 50 verse 1. Where is the bill of your mother's divorcement? They could not provide any evidence. So at this point in time, God was still married to Judah. But notice what God is going to say in verse 2. So God is saying that thou hast played the harlot with many lovers. They were cheating on God with other gods. Yet return again to me, saith Jehovah. Verse 2 says, lift up thine eyes unto the high places and see where thou hast not been lying with. In the ways hast thou sat for them, as the Arabian in the wilderness, and thou hast polluted the land with thy whoredoms and with thy wickedness. Therefore the showers have been withholden, and there hath been no latter rain, and thou hadst a whore's head. Notice how God is describing his wife. Thou hadst a whore's head, or a whore's forehead. Thou refuse to be ashamed. Will thou not from this time cry unto me, my father, thou art the guide of my youth? Will he reserve his anger forever? Will he keep it to the end? Behold, thou hast spoken and done evil things as thou couldest. Jehovah said also unto me in the days of Josiah the king, hast thou seen that which backsliding Israel hath done? She is gone up upon every high mountain and under every green tree, and there hath played the harlot. And I said after she had done all these things, so despite all that Israel had done to God in committing spiritual adultery by worshiping other gods and making other images to their idols, their false gods, God was saying, after all that she had done, God was saying, turn thou unto me. But Israel, she returned not. And notice what God was going to say of Judah. And their treacherous sister, Judah, saw it. So God's plea to Israel was for them to return again to him. He said, return again to me, and turn thou unto me. His pleas fell on deaf ears, because she refused to listen, and she returned not, according to Jeremiah 3, verse 1 and verse 7. Therefore, God did what he had to do. And notice, God followed his own law that is found in Deuteronomy 24, verse 1 to 4, and he divorced Israel. And this is what happened. This will prove that the two Hebrew words, Kerithus and Shalah, are separate words requiring separate actions. And you're going to see from Jeremiah 3, verse 8, that God followed his own law. Notice what the verse says. And I saw when for all the causes whereby backsliding Israel committed adultery, I had put her away, that's one action, and given her a bill of divorce, that's a second action. Yet her treacherous sister Judah feared not, but went and played the harlot also. So notice what happened. God put away Israel, but before he did so, he gave her a bill of divorcement. He gave her evidence that she was no longer his wife. Let's do a little exegesis of the passage, because the Jews had clearly misunderstood Deuteronomy chapter 24, verse 1 to 4, as some are doing even today. God's divorce of the house of Israel was to serve as a cautionary tale to the house of Judah. Husbands were only forbidden to take back their wives to whom they had given a bill of divorcement if they married another. And that was according to Deuteronomy chapter 24, verse 4. However, husbands were not forbidden to take back their wives whom they had merely put away, because putting away your wife does not mean the marriage comes to an end. It is simply a separation. This was clearly seen in the case of Isaiah 50 verse 1, which showed that Judah was only separated from God for 70 years, as long as 70 years, but they were still married to God. But he took her back after her Babylonian captivity. Jeremiah chapter 3 describes God pleading with Israel to return to him during the separation and before the bill of divorce was actually given. So God was pleading with them during the time that they were going away and playing the harlot, committing adultery, worshiping false gods. During that time, God was pleading with them to return unto him, but they refused until he gave them a bill of divorcement. So God was pleading before the actual bill of divorce was given to Israel. This could also be seen in Jeremiah chapter 3, verse 12 to 14, which states, "Go proclaim these words toward the north and say, Return thou backsliding Israel, saith Jehovah, and I will not cause mine anger to fall upon you, for I am merciful, saith Jehovah, and I will not keep anger forever. Only acknowledge thine iniquity, that thou hast transgressed against Jehovah thy God, and hast scattered thy ways to the strangers under every green tree, and ye have not obeyed my voice, saith Jehovah. Turn, O backsliding children, saith Jehovah, for I am married unto you." So at the time when he was pleading, they were still his wife, and he was saying to them, to backsliding Israel, "Return unto me, and I will take you back. You have cheated on me, you have gone astray, you have had many lovers, but I'm saying to Israel," God was saying to Israel, "Return to me, and I will take you back. And I will take you one of a city and two of a family, and I will bring you to Zion." However, by Jeremiah 3, verse 8, he stated that for all the causes whereby backsliding Israel committed adultery, I had put her away and given her a bill of divorce. This bill of divorce that was given to Israel dissolved or terminated the marriage covenant between God and Israel, thus relinquishing God of his rights and responsibilities to Israel as his wife. Jeremiah 3, verse 8, my friends, is vital in understanding the difference between put away, which is shalah, which is the Hebrew word for put away, and divorce, which is, and the Hebrew word is Kerithus. Notice there are two different Strong's number. Shalah is H7971 and Kerithus is H3748. Jeremiah 3, verse 8 proves that Shalah and Kerithus are not interchangeable words, but two separate actions that are represented by two different words. However, many continue to insist and argue erroneously that put away means divorce. If that were true, then notice how absurd Jeremiah 3, verse 8 would sound, because those who continue to make such an argument would have God saying this: "What I've done here is to take out the actual words that are there and to put the word divorce, because that is how persons are translating the word shalah." Notice how absurd it would sound if shalah actually means divorce and not simply putting away. Notice how it would sound. "And I saw, when for all the causes whereby backsliding Israel committed adultery, I had divorced her and divorced her. Yet her treacherous sister, Judah, feared not, but went and played the harlot also." That is how the verse would be rendered if shalah actually means divorce. The first divorce is shalah, which is put away. And the second divorce is Kerithus, which is to give the woman a bill of divorcement, which is the legal document required to make the marriage dissolved. My friends, it should be quite clear by now that the sending away or putting away of a wife is not the same as divorce, but is only equivalent to a separation, which means that both parties were still legally married. Even God followed the law in Deuteronomy 24, verse 1 to 2, because both actions were done in ending the marriage with Israel. God, by his own admission from his own mouth, said he put her away and gave her a bill of divorcement and left her to be a prey for the Assyrians. So after God divorced Israel, she could then go and be another man's wife. She could continue to worship her idols. She could continue to serve other gods. God ended his covenant relationship with the house of Israel. And I need to make a point here, because when God married Israel at Sinai, it was one nation. King Saul became the first king of a united Israel. After Saul's death, David became the second king of a united Israel. David's son Solomon also ruled over a united Israel. But after Solomon's death, Solomon's son Rehoboam ascended the throne. And it was during his reign that the united nation of Israel was divided into two kingdoms. The northern kingdom became known as Israel, with Samaria as its capital, and the southern kingdom was known as Judah, with Jerusalem as its capital. So God divorced the house of Israel, but God still had a marriage relationship with the house of Judah. So Israel was eventually carried away into captivity in 722 BC by the Assyrians, after God removed his divine protection. And this sad account can be found and read about in 2 Kings chapter 17, verse 6 to 23. So you can read that particular passage of 2 Kings chapter 17, verse 6 to 23 to see what happened to the house of Israel after God's divorce of her. My friends, the translators of the King James Version have not been consistent in their translation of putting away and divorce. This is partly responsible for the confusion in the debate about marriage, divorce, and remarriage. There's also another Hebrew word that adds to the confusion, because it is used interchangeably to mean divorce when it should actually have been translated as put away. The Hebrew word of which I speak is garash, which is the Strong's number H1644. Garash occurs 47 times in 45 verses of the Hebrew concordance of the King James Version. I'm going to look at this word in the Blue Letter Bible so you can see the inconsistency, and that this particular word has been mistranslated by the King James Version translators. Friends, based on the outline of biblical usage and how it has been used in the scriptures, the principal meaning of garash is to drive out, expel, cast out, or thrust out. However, garash, Strong's H1644, have also been translated as put away 2 times and divorce 2 times. Notice these verses that illustrate the confusion caused by the mistranslation and the inconsistency of the King James Version translators. Notice these verses. I'm going to give you 3 verses to prove that the King James translators have mistranslated the word garash, and they have been inconsistent in their use of that particular word. God gave a particular command to the priests in Leviticus chapter 21, verse 7. At this point, I'm going to go to the Blue Letter Bible to look at Leviticus chapter 21, verse 7. Leviticus chapter 21, verse 7. So let's look at the Leviticus chapter 21, reading from verse 7. I want you to see this mistranslation and inconsistency. Notice, so God was giving a command to the priests, sons of Aaron, and the Levites. Leviticus chapter 21, verse 7. The priests, they shall not take a wife that is a whore or profane, neither shall they take a woman put away from her husband, for he is holy unto his God. So in Leviticus chapter 21, verse 7, the translators correctly translate this number, H1644, as put away. I'm going to click on this particular word in a few for you to get the correct meaning of the word. Let's do that right now. So the word for put away is another word. The common word used for put away is shalah, which I've presented on earlier. But notice this word, it is pronounced this way. I can't roll my tongues like this particular person.
Strong's H, 1644. Garash. Garash.
So that's the pronunciation of that Hebrew word. The King James translated 47 times. And notice the dominant meaning of this word. It means to drive out. It is translated 20 times. Cast out 8 times. Thrust out 6 times. Drive away 2 times. Put away 2 times, as I referenced. Divorce 2 times. Driven 1 time. Expel, and so forth. The dominant meaning of this word is to drive out, to expel, to cast out, to drive away. It does not mean divorce. It means to put away, as I will explain. But you don't have to guess or speculate how the word is used in the original Hebrew and how it is translated in our modern version. If you look at how it is used in all these verses, it says Strong's number H 1644 matches the Hebrew Gadash, which occurs 47 times in 45 verses in the Hebrew concordance of the King James Version. I'm going to scroll through some of these verses and you'll get an idea, a very good idea, as to the correct meaning of the word. Genesis 3 verse 24, where it is also used. So he drove out the man. This is God expelling Adam and Eve from the garden. Genesis 4:14, behold, thou hast driven me out this day from the face of the earth. This has to do with Cain after he killed Abel. Genesis 21 verse 10, wherefore she said unto Abraham, cast out this bondwoman. That was Sarah telling Abraham to get rid of Hagar after she instigated him to have a child by her. Exodus 2 verse 7. Notice it's the same number, H 1644. And the shepherds came and drove them away. Exodus 6 verse 1. Shall he drive them out? Let's scroll down. And the Lord said unto Moses, yet will I bring one plague more upon Pharaoh and upon Egypt. Afterwards he will let you go hence. When he shall let you go, he shall surely thrust you out hence altogether. Next verse, Exodus 12:39. Neither had they, for it was not leavened, because they were thrust out of Egypt. So the children of Israel were thrust out of Egypt hastily by Pharaoh. Scroll down, I'm just taking some random verses. Exodus 23 verse 29. I will not drive them out from before. Exodus 23 verse 30. By little and little I will drive them out before thee. Let's take a few further, so I'm not cherry picking any. All right, so this verse now is, so the one that we looked at earlier was Leviticus chapter 21 verse 7. And 7 verses later, in Leviticus chapter 21 verse 7, Gadash is translated as put away by the King James translators. But 7 verses later in Leviticus 21 verse 14, notice how they translate the same word, same number, H 1644. A widow or a divorced woman, that is how they translate it in this instance. A widow or a divorced woman, or profane, or a harlot, these shall he not take. Speaking about the priest, but he shall take a virgin of his own people to wife. And let me just click on this number so you can see that it is the same Garash that they translate in Leviticus 21 verse 14 as a divorced woman. So it's the same Garash.
Strong's H 1644. Garash.
Same Garash.
Garash.
But in Leviticus 21 verse 7, they translate it as put away correctly. And in Leviticus 21 verse 14, just 7 verses later, they mistranslate it to read a divorced woman. Let's go back to our study notes. So notice Leviticus 21 verse 7 again. They shall not take a wife that is a whore or profane, neither shall they take a woman put away. I will look at this number, Strong's H 1644, from her husband. Notice these words, you know. Neither shall they take a woman put away from her husband. So the woman still has a husband, for he is holy unto his God. put away does not mean divorce. If you are put away, you still have a husband if you're a woman. So notice Leviticus 21 verse 7. And the word is translated as put away. However, notice the inconsistency in the translation of the same word just 7 verses later in Leviticus chapter 21 verse 14. A widow or a divorced woman, Strong's H 1644, or profane or a harlot, these shall he not take, but he shall take a virgin of his own people to wife. That is in relation to the priests. The King James translators then corrected their error by translating Ezekiel chapter 44 verse 22 as follows. So in Leviticus chapter 21 verse 7, they translated Gadash as put away, and that is the correct translation. In Leviticus 21 verse 14, they mistranslated it as a divorced woman. But in Ezekiel 44 verse 22, they corrected their error and they translated the word corrected. Notice how the verse read in Ezekiel 44 verse 22. And it is actually a reference to the account in Leviticus chapter 21. Neither shall they take for their wives a widow, nor her that is put away. Same number, Strong's H 1644, and I'll prove it from the Blue Letter Bible, so you don't have to take my notes for it. But they shall take maidens of the seed of the house of Israel, or a widow that had a priest before. Let's go back to this verse in the Blue Letter Bible so you can see that the word translated as put away is actually Strong's H 1644 or Garash. Let's go back to the Blue Letter Bible so you can see that I'm not carrying you wide, I'm not leading you astray. So let's go to Ezekiel chapter 44, verse 22. That is the verse in question. Neither shall they take for their wives a widow, nor her that is put away. Here's the word, Hebrew word, translated as put away. It is Gadash. Gadash. This is the pronunciation.
Strong's H 1644. Garash. Garash.
Okay, so this has led to much of the confusion because words that should be translated as put away have been translated as divorced. And this changes the entire meaning of the verse and what God is actually saying. The verses above, if obeyed by the priests, would guarantee that they would not marry a woman who could possibly be married to another man, because a put away woman was still legally bound to her husband. This bears repeating. A put away woman was still legally bound to her husband. Notice that the priests were commanded to marry only virgins or a widow of another priest for obvious reasons. Virgins because they have not known any man sexually, and all marriages have to be consummated by that act. And widows because their husbands are dead. Marrying a virgin or a widow gave a priest the assurance that his wife had no legal ties to another man. Friends, the final Old Testament verse that we must look at to prove that divorce and putting away are not the same thing is the often quoted but mistranslated Malachi 2 verse 16. This verse has been quoted, misquoted many times and used by pastors and Bible students to say that God hates divorce. Many persons, my friends, viewers, have quoted Malachi 2 verse 16, which according to some Bible translations and versions have God allegedly saying that he hates divorce. I'm almost certain that you may have heard this verse rendered in that fashion before. However, as God's spokesman and ambassador, I am here to mash down that lie. During this presentation, it has been clearly shown from the scriptures that the Hebrew word for divorce is Kerithus, which is the Strong's number H3748. And that is not, I repeat, that is not the word that God inspired his prophet to use in Malachi 2, verse 16. We're going to look at that verse. Instead, Malachi was inspired by God to use the Hebrew word shalah, which is Strong's H7971. As explained before, shalah and Kerithus are not interchangeable. Let's read together Malachi 2. Let's read together from Malachi 2 verse 11, and then culminate with the mistranslated text of Malachi 2 verse 16, so that we can get the context of what God was saying. Malachi 2 verse 11. Judah hath dealt treacherously, and an abomination is committed in Israel and in Jerusalem. For Judah hath profaned the holiness of Jehovah, which he loved, and hath married the daughter of a strange god. Friends, God charged Judah with two things. One, treachery, and two, abomination, because they were abusing and putting away their wives, or the wives of their own nation, and marrying women from heathen nations who worshipped strange gods. You can also see this, that they were doing the same thing in the time of Nehemiah, in Nehemiah chapter 13, verse 23. Remember as well, in my first presentation in this series on the biblical view of marriage, that under the old covenant law, men could have more than one wife at a time, while a put-away woman was left destitute, and in order to fend for herself, oftentimes resorted to prostitution just to survive. And that is why I've gone through this detailed presentation from the first presentation to show the biblical view of marriage, that under the old covenant, men could have multiple wives. It was allowed by God. And these men, because they could have multiple wives, while the women could have only one husband at a time, what they were doing was to put away their wives without a bill of divorcement that will free the woman so that she could go and be another man's wife, while at the same time enjoying the comfort of another wife that they had. The woman was left in a rather precarious position, and this is the treachery that God was addressing. Notice verse 12. Jehovah will cut off the man that doeth this, the master and the scholar, out of the tabernacles of Jacob, and him that offereth an offering unto Jehovah of hosts. And this have ye done again, covering the altar of Jehovah with tears, with weeping, and with crying out, insomuch that he hath regarded not the offering anymore, or receiveth it with goodwill at your hand. So what was happening here? The put-away women were crying bitter tears unto God to plead their cause. And in response, God rebuked the men of Judah for their treachery against their wives. Verse 14 says, Yet ye say, wherefore? Because Jehovah hath been witness between thee and the wife of thy youth, against whom thou hast dealt treacherously. Yet is she thy companion and the wife of thy covenant. Friends, this is crucial, because God is stating very categorically that even though the men of Judah had put away their wives, the marriage covenant was still intact. God was a witness between the man and the wife of his youth. Notice the phrase in the text. God had been a witness between the man, the men of Judah, and the wife of his youth, and stated that what they did was treachery. Notice that God also emphasized that the woman was still thy companion and the wife of thy covenant, because marriages were dissolved only by the writing of a bill of divorcement or death, and not by simply putting away. This again, my friends, proves that putting away is not the same thing as divorce. Verse 15, as we come down to that particular text, verse 15 of Malachi 2. And did not he make one? So God was reminding them that his original plan for marriage was for a man to leave his father and his mother and to cleave unto his wife, and the twain shall become one flesh. So God was saying, and did not he make one, yet had he the residue of the spirit, and wherefore one, that he might seek a godly seed. Therefore, take heed to your spirit, and let none deal treacherously against the wife of his youth. And notice the verse now that has been mistranslated. For Jehovah, the God of Israel, said that he hateth putting away. That is the correct translation of the Hebrew word shalah. For one covereth violence with his garment, saith Jehovah of hosts. Therefore, take heed to your spirit, that ye deal not treacherously with the wife of your youth. So let's go to the Blue Letter Bible and look at the Hebrew word that has been mistranslated. Let's go to the Blue Letter Bible and let's look at that Hebrew word. The Hebrew word that is used, it's Malachi chapter 2, verse 16. Malachi 2, verse 16. This is the text in question. For Jehovah, the God of Israel, saith that he hateth putting away. Is the Strong's number 7971. And that is the Hebrew word shalah. And I'll prove it. There it is. The Hebrew word shalah. This is the pronunciation again.
Strong's H, 7971. Shalach. Shalach.
Shalah. So that is the word that is translated correctly in the King James Version as putting away. And notice, it means to send, go, send forth, put forth, send away, put away 7 times, and so forth. To put out. So let's go back to the verse. So what I'm going to do now, so I've shown that the Hebrew word that is used, that was inspired by God himself, that Malachi wrote in the original Hebrew language, was shalah, and it means to put away. I'm going to, at this time, look at a number of Bible versions and translations that have mistranslated shalah to mean divorce. So I'm going to go to the tools, and I'm going to go to Bibles, and this is going to give us the various translations for Malachi 2, verse 16. We already looked at the King James Version. The New King James Version has mistranslated the Hebrew word. Notice what it has God saying. For Jehovah, God of Israel, says that he hates divorce. This is what many people believe God said. That is not true. God did not say that he hates divorce, because God himself gave the law on divorce. So this is the New King James Version. Notice the New Living Translation. For I hate divorce, emphatically, exclamation, says Jehovah, the God of Israel. The New International Version. The man who hates and divorces his wife, says Jehovah, the God of Israel. The English Standard Version. For the man who does not love his wife but divorces her, says Jehovah, the God of Israel. So all of these versions and translations have mistranslated the Hebrew word shalah to mean divorce. Let's continue. The Christian Standard Bible. If he hates and divorces his wife, says Jehovah, God of Israel. And this is a Spanish version, Revised Version. Let's look at the New American Standard Bible, 2020. For I hate divorce, says Jehovah, the God of Israel. Let's continue looking at what is causing the confusion. New American Standard Bible, 1995. For I hate divorce, says Jehovah, the God of Israel. The New English Translation. I hate divorce, says Jehovah, God of Israel. Revised Standard Version. For I hate divorce, says Jehovah, the God of Israel. The American Standard Version translates it correctly. For I hate putting away, saith Jehovah, the God of Israel. Young's literal translation. For I hate sending away, said Jehovah, God of Israel. Young's literal translation and American Standard Version translates Shallah correctly. Darby translation. For I hate putting away, saith Jehovah, the God of Israel. That's also translated correctly. The Webster's Bible. For Jehovah, the God of Israel, saith that he hateth putting away. That is also translated correctly. The Hebrew Names Version. For I hate divorce, says Jehovah, the God of Israel, which is a Hebrew word for Israel. You have seen, I've made a point, and you can go down and you will see that much of our modern versions and Bibles have mistranslated the Hebrew word shallah to mean divorce. That is not the correct translation of that Hebrew word. And that is what is driving much of the confusion in this debate about marriage, divorce, and remarriage. So let's go back to our study notes as we come to a close. The King James Version, the American Standard Version, the Young's Literal Translation, and the Webster's Bible have all translated shallah correctly to mean putting away, while the New King James Version, the New Living Translation, the New International Version, the English Standard Version, and the Revised Standard Version, among others, have all mistranslated shallah to mean divorce. Friends, this is precisely why consulting the original languages is very important, because, and this is very important, to repeat and attribute words to God that he did not utter is slanderous. Similarly, to print, publish, and attribute words to God that he did not say is libelous. Slander and libel, my friends, are false statements that are very damaging to a person's reputation and character. And what we are attributing to God is to say that God said something that he did not. This presentation has clearly outlined the difference between putting away and divorce by using the scriptures and the scriptures only to prove and make the case. The final points to be made in summarizing this very comprehensive presentation is to outline that God is not the author of confusion, according to 1 Corinthians chapter 14, verse 33. The scriptures are very clear that divorce is the lawful dissolution of a marriage. Malachi 2, verse 16 was not speaking about divorce. Let me repeat, Malachi 2, verse 16 was not speaking about divorce, and divorce was not the treachery that was being addressed. If that were the case, then God himself would have promoted and commanded treachery when he gave the law in Deuteronomy 24, verse 1 to 4. Think about it, viewers. What are we really saying about God? Because if that were true, then God himself would have committed treachery in divorcing the house of Israel in Jeremiah chapter 3, verse 8. Think about it. These are logical and reasonable questions. Is that what we are really saying? That God committed treachery? Because God, by his own admission, is a divorcee. He divorced the house of Israel in Jeremiah chapter 3, verse 8. My friends, viewers, we can't eat our cakes and have it at the same time. And we definitely can't have it both ways. The correct interpretation and understanding is that the treachery committed by the men of Judah in Malachi 2, verse 11 and verses 14 to 16 was the putting away of their wives without a bill of divorcement, as per the stipulation given in Deuteronomy 24, verse 1 to 4. The treachery was that these put away women were not divorced and therefore were still legally married to these men. If they attached themselves to another man, they would commit adultery, a sin punishable by death. So this placed these women in a rather precarious position in a male-dominated society. This, my friends, is precisely why God stated that he hateth putting away, and the very reason that he provided for divorce, to end a marriage because of the hardness of men's heart. The divorce law found in Deuteronomy 24, verse 1 to 4, was less of a permission for the man, but more of a mechanism of protection for the woman. I need to repeat this. The divorce law found in Deuteronomy 24, verse 1 to 4, was less of a permission for the man, but more of a mechanism of protection for the woman. As I close, the next video in this presentation will address what Yeshua or Jesus had to say on the issue of marriage, divorce, and remarriage by looking at the Greek words translated as putting away and divorce. I will again prove in my next presentation by unlocking the scriptures that much of the current confusion on this topic is as a result of poor translation of two Greek terms. Friends, I hope this comprehensive and exhaustive study on divorce and putting away was helpful, because a lot of persons who have been divorced have been living with a lot of shame and guilt. And many persons, many churches have taught that they cannot remarry. But this presentation has proven that the confusion has been due mainly in part to the mistranslation of two key Hebrew words. So the word for divorce is a very specific word, Kerithus. It appears only 4 times in 4 verses of the Hebrew scriptures, and it simply means divorce, which is the ending of a marriage. And the other word, shalah, is the Hebrew word that is commonly used to put away, send out, cast out. Shalah and Kerithus are 2 separate Hebrew words meaning different things and required different actions. So I hope that this presentation was very helpful. If you like this presentation, you can leave a comment. I solicit your comments. Share this particular video so that persons can understand what is driving the issue behind the confusion in the debate of marriage, divorce, and remarriage. And subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell, and you'll be notified. You'll be the first to know when I upload my next video. Thanks for listening, and thanks for watching, and may God continue to bless us richly in Jesus Christ.